So what happens with the book, Stephen? Like, how does it, is it announced online, or how do you find out?
Yeah, there's going to be a sort of online, there's going to be a live online ceremony. Barack Obama's coming. So I'll be on a call with Barack Obama later, yeah.
That's really cool. Michelle Obama went to my school when I was...
Oh, is that? Yeah.
She visited. I got sent home, and me and all the other naughty kids weren't allowed to be there because they didn't want us to ruin it.
That's grim.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so yeah, so it's
just for everyone listening, welcome.
Yeah. Ooh.
Sorry, I was just going to say to everyone listening, welcome. If you want to put in the chat where you're from and what you're doing, what stage you are, it'll be lovely for us to see. So you can just write it in the chat, just to say where you live, what stage of life you're at. Not questions, but just to introduce yourself. It'll be lovely to see you. And we'll kick off in a couple of minutes. Hello, Samira. Hello. Can you hear me, by the way, Stephen and Silé? Because I'm like, feel like I'm talking. It's a bit weird when you don't quite know who's
Yeah, no, can hear you. It's always really weird with these because you're not really, you're not in a room with people, so you can't like bounce off of each other and know what everyone's kind of where everyone is. It's quite difficult.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. Okay, we've got Paris from Manchester, Belfast. We've got all sorts of people all around Glasgow. Well, we're doing well here. We're all around the country. Birmingham. This is brilliant. So it's lovely to hear from everyone.
Yeah.
London, Sweden, Glasgow again. Hello, Kevin. Canada. Wow, this is really like international today. We like this. Excellent. So we'll welcome all of you. Hartlepool, Lake District, Kent. It's going so fast I can't see it. But okay, well, look, I think we are, we've only got an hour, so keep introducing yourself. And it's really lovely to see all of you on here. We have a combination of some of our alumni, university students, aspiring wannabe publishers, all sorts. So it's really lovely to meet you. My name's Josie. I am one of the founders of Creative Access. I'm the chief executive. I'm really thrilled to be here as ever today. It's one of my favourite parts of my job is meeting some amazing people. And today is especially special for us for 3 reasons. First of all, we happen to have, by brilliant planning, be doing this in Working Publishing Week. So that we're really pleased to be doing that. But more importantly, the 2 people who are very special to us, we have Silé, who is one of our amazing alumni, who was at the Publishers Association and has had a brilliant journey, which she'll introduce herself better than I, but she's got, as well as a new baby, and she also has a new job as a literary agent, which is brilliant because that's a very different part of the process to Stephen. And Stephen is also very special for us because not only is he chair of the most amazing publishing company, chief executive of Faber Faber, one of the most amazing publishers out there, but he's also chair of Creative Access, which is really, really amazing for us. He's been chair since the start of this year and has already helped us to make a big impact. So just for all of you there today, I'm going to let you hear from them because they have got lots of interesting things today. Couple of things here. We will be recording this, so if you miss it or you drop out, don't worry, you can pick it up again afterwards. We will also be live tweeting and doing an Instagram story, and if you do the same, we'd love you to please tag us and just do follow us, of course, on @_Creative Access. If you have a question, and I know lots of you have submitted questions in advance, and I know that, both Stephen and Silé are well prepared for them. We may not have time to cover them all, but we'll do our best. But if you have a live question that you'd like to answer, you can do it via the Q&A, not via the chat, but just via the Q&A, and we will pick them up from there. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Silé, first of all. Silé, if you would like to introduce yourself, and then you can move on to introduce Stephen. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. I'm looking forward to everything you've got to say.
Thanks, Josie. Thank you. I think she might have frozen a little bit towards the end there, but hi, I am Silé. I have been around in publishing relatively recently. I've done quite a few internships, and then I was at the Publishers Association doing communications and marketing, and then I was at Curtis Brown as an assistant to a senior agent there. And more recently, I have moved to Mushens Entertainment, which is a boutique literary agency representing my own authors, predominantly non-fiction authors, but I just look for really good stories and really good people to work with, essentially. And yeah, that's kind of me and a very, very quick kind of overview of my journey, but I'm going to be talking to Stephen Page, who is the CEO of Faber Faber, and one of the loveliest CEOs I've ever spoken to. So has a wealth, seriously, you are, has a wealth of knowledge and a real desire to share it with people. And a lot of you have asked questions about routes into publishing, internships, getting knowledge and the right kinds of skills that you need to kind of transfer over into publishing if you were doing something else before. So when you introduce yourself to everyone, Stephen, could you also talk a little bit about your journey into publishing and where you are now?
Yeah, well, it's really wonderful to be here. So I grew up in the Midlands. I grew up near Birmingham. And I wasn't a very big reader as a adolescent, even as a child. I was much more interested in playing music, actually. And so when I came to London, it was with a rock and roll band from just south of Birmingham, and I was a drummer, and still am, I'm glad to say, but it wasn't my path, shall we say, thankfully. And but when I came to London, I got a job in a bookshop. Essentially, this was in 1987. Towards the end of the last century. That's going to date me. And I got a job in Croydon, and I worked in the Whitgift shopping centre in Croydon in a bookshop for about a year and a half, and quite quickly realised that books were much more my calling than rock and roll. And I'd been at university. I studied at Bristol University. I studied history. But I got a job in a bookshop, and then from the bookshop, I wrote speculatively to about 100 publishing houses, and I got 2 job interviews, and one of them was as a marketing executive at Longman, which was in Harlow Town in Essex, and I got the job, and I went and did this job, and this was 1988, and the job was importing manuals on how to use a computer from California. And as you can imagine, my knowledge of computing was probably scant. My knowledge of publishing was scant. My knowledge of marketing was pretty scant. But so how did I end up doing that? And how did that lead me to running Faber Faber is sort of, it's I suppose one of the things I would say about it is that sort of knocking on the door and getting in is hard in publishing. There's no doubt. It's a lot easier when I did it. It's much harder now. But having said it's hard, I still think it's possible. And it does just take a bit of perseverance. And it doesn't, I think one of the things we might talk about today is that if you'd said to me, why was I going to try and work in publishing? I'd have said, because I want to be an editor. I'd have said that straight away. I didn't really know anything about all the other jobs in publishing. And I ended up with an extremely curious job in my first employment. But it was a beginning, and it taught me about sales. It taught me about marketing. It taught me about sort of pricing things. I got to know a lot of booksellers, and then I got another job. This one was at Transworld, similar job, but there I was thrown a gardening list, which it was an £8 million gardening list, and it was me and a desk and a car in the car park. Made the best of that, and then I got a job as a sales director at a brilliant small independent called Fourth Estate, and that's really where I ended up in my right place. But my first 2 jobs were I was almost like a bystander at Transworld when I worked there. It was just amazing to watch this incredible commercial publishing house, but I did it from really quite a side view. I did it from books about computers, books about gardening, and and learning about sales. And from Fourth Estate was bought by HarperCollins while I worked there, and I ended up being a sales and marketing director at HarperCollins. And from there, I ended up being chief executive of Faber Faber 20 years ago.
And you stayed doing it. Is it something that, I mean, this is probably a very big question, but is it something that you find it changes as you go on? Because you've done it for a long time now. So do you feel that is always evolving and that your role is always interesting to you, or is it more that you've got the measure of it and you're really enjoying it, so you want to keep doing it?
I think if you'd asked me whether I was going to stick at anything for 20 years, I'd have said, don't be daft. I'm quite restless, and I'm someone who likes the sort of strategic ideas side of running a publishing business as much as I love the relationships with writers and the books and just the whole process. But I think my 20 years at Faber have, in my publishing life, really, there've been 5 revolutions. you know, around book selling, around price, around online selling, along ebooks, social media, you know, and always having to adapt a 90-year-old business to these evolving environments has just been perpetually interesting. And also, I suppose, I landed in a place where I suppose my vocation, you know, and I think publishing is largely speaking a vocation. I think, but I don't want to be too, I don't want to make that sound snobby or worthy, you know. I think it's just that the calling of books is so interesting, and as readers, we're so individual that it's an industry where if you can find the coming together of your vocation with a place, and I just happened to find that at Faber. You know, it was just so closely aligned to my own interests and my own passion as a reader. And so, yeah, so staying there and evolving it and trying to make it relevant and also to play a part in the industry, it's sort of pinched me. I can't quite believe that 2 decades have passed. But there's a gesture in business that I rather like. And I've read quite a few business books in my life, and most of them are 2 pages of useful and 300 pages of waffle. But I shouldn't say that. There's probably a business book publisher.
Yeah, I mean, the books on your list, 300 pages.
I could give you a long list. But this book is called The Fifth Discipline. It's a very good book, but the whole thing sort of rests on a gesture. And I think a gesture that's about sort of business leadership and the thing that I try to do. So and it involves a rubber band, and you hold the front of the rubber band, well, such as there is. You make a front of the rubber band with one hand and the other. And this hand tells you where you are, and this hand says where you want to go. And you stretch the rubber band to where you want to go, and you watch the back hand follow. So you create vision in a business, and you create sort of change and evolution, and you have to put that out there into the business, and you have to explain it to people, and then you watch the organization move towards it. But it never gets to where you say it should get to, because it shouldn't, because in moving, the organization will always be smarter than you, and the people in the business will always have better solutions and better ideas. But it is your job when you're in charge to lay out the vision, to say, we're going this way, folks, you know. And I like doing that, and I've liked doing it at Faber. And the changing environment of publishing is such an exciting business that that tension is always being created. You're always having to figure stuff out.
Yeah, and I think we've got a lot of people who are studying at the moment, and various levels of studies, but a lot of people who'll be looking for their first job or graduate job. And one of the questions that we got earlier was, let me just double check who that was from Lexus, who asked, when applying to publishing related jobs, what's one of the biggest mistakes that candidates make on their cover letters? And I think what you just said there about always wanting to know where you are and then be going towards that is quite important. I think a lot of people, when applying to jobs, can make the mistake of going, oh, I just want to work in this particular role because I want to work in books. And then that's kind of it, with no future plans or no ideas of where they want their career to go. If they want to work in books, do they want to work in books forever, or is it a starting point and you want to work in something else? I think that's quite important. Is that something you found when you're looking at cover letters for people who you're hiring?
I think one of the things that is always really striking about a good cover letter is that somebody is able quite succinctly, so you don't want a long letter, you want a good, strong, economic letter. And one of the things I think that if it demonstrates that the person writing the letter has really understood your business, not just publishing generally, if they're writing to me about a job at Faber, I like to see from the letter that they've really researched, that they really thought about Faber. And one of the key things, it applies to interviews as well, is just to try to remember that publishing, you know, like every business, is confronted with problems, and problems for which you want solutions. And I think demonstrating that you have skills and a sort of outlook that are strong and appealing is one thing. I think demonstrating within your cover letter that you've thought about the business you're applying to and how your skills are useful to that business is very arresting. And I can promise that it doesn't happen as often as it might. You know, you get a lot of covering letters. I mean, I think the other thing to say in a covering letter is it's perfectly okay to say, in fact, probably reasonably important to say that you really, really care about working in publishing and working with books, and that if reading or writing, if these things are really important to you, it's well worth saying so. But at the heart of it, I think you are writing for a job. You're not writing to get a job in publishing. When you're writing to a specific organization saying, I want to work for you in this job for these reasons.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you find the same, Silé? Do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at quite a lot of intern cover letters, and done quite a lot of hiring or recruitment for interns and entry level positions. And I feel like when the best ones are when people know that this is the job they want to do. Even if you've applied to 10 other jobs at the same time, this one is the one you want to do, and working with this team or this type of book or this agency, maybe this area of agenting, if you're really interested in foreign rights, say, and you want to learn more or do more, that's really good. I think someone's asked, Shannon, what's your advice for someone who wishes to get into publishing but has no prior experience? I think even for candidates who don't have publishing experience or directly relatable experience to publishing, the ones that have been the best for me are the ones who can show that they've engaged with books on some level. So if that's for marketing, they've seen a really standout campaign and they thought it was really interesting because it targeted certain consumers and it was on the tube, but a lot of the people who, usually commute to work might not be the people who would pick up that book. So it's interesting that they've done that. Just being able to show that you're engaging with the industry and with books as a product quite well is always made an application stand out to me, I think. And I think it's the most interesting ones are the ones who use their transferable skills really well. So it may be that you've never worked in publishing or editorial or sales directly, but you've worked in something similar. You might have worked in retail, or you might have worked in a theatre, and all of those places where you talk to people and you can then take that into a role in publishing. I think those ones are the ones that stand out for me.
I saw a very good presentation someone did about their career recently, and they showed their jobs and then they just made those disappear, and up came the skills they learned instead. It was a really brilliant presentation. He came on after me and I felt foolish afterwards. He was so good. But I think that's the other thing, is to know that there are skills that you will have through other work if you haven't worked in publishing, or if through your education or whatever. But there are also skills you can acquire, and you can acquire those without waiting to be offered them. And a lot of that is to do with the rich amount of online learning that you can do. So if you look at a publishing business or a role within a publisher and think, I'd really like to do that, but I'm a bit short here or there, always worth seeing if you can arm yourself with some of those skills and name them within your job application. Because those people who've learned how to build a website, who've doing a blog about their reading, or who demonstrate that they've got a certificate in a skill, or that sort of thing, you can always be doing in order to keep building your CV. And I think publishing is very, very open to now. I don't think it was, but I think it is much more open now to portability from other industries. In fact, we're quite sort of hungry for it in some ways. But I think it has to come with having paid attention to the book industry, and just as Silé says, it would be, great to be able to reference an excellent campaign, great to be able to reference some of the sort of industry's structures and, so retailers, or particularly good campaigns that you saw in social media that connected back to retail. It's having sort of absorbing slightly by osmosis, absorbing the industry by paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I did, which I would recommend, is I followed as many people from the book world on Twitter as I could. And half the time I had no idea what anyone was talking about. And there were kind of, industry in jokes that I just didn't get, and was like, oh, okay. But the thing that brought out of me was I had that language almost intrinsically. I didn't know I was picking it up, but I'm always on Twitter, sometimes too much so I was picking it up as I was just scrolling, and I was engaging with things I would normally engage with, and then there was a book, or there was an editor tweeting about something, or there was an agent tweeting about something. So I just sort of learned the language, which can be sometimes quite obstructive. I think it can be. We have a tendency to be quite insular as publishers and agents, and there's a lot of work people are doing in opening up the industry, but going to where people are, so especially on Twitter or Instagram or things like this, so that you can pick things up as you go. And a lot of people ask for coffees, or now that we're all online, for half an hour Zoom, and where people can give their time is also really valuable. I think a lot of people are quite open with that too, which is really, really good. Someone,
you can follow me at Stephen.
There's a little plug for Stephen.
Recruiting my followers. No, but I'm there, and I do tweet about industry stuff. I don't. You won't find out lots of things about what I do at home, but you will. I promise. It's mainly industry stuff. It's all industry. Yeah. So Stephen at Stephen Pub.
And I mean, if you want to know about how I burnt toast the other day and how the builders come round and woke my baby up this morning, then you can follow me at Silé Edwards, which is my name, and then Loquies, because when I was a teenager, I thought I was really witty. So I came up with a terrible @name that's just kind of stuck. But someone
asked if we're on LinkedIn, and yes, I'm on LinkedIn. Just search me as Stephen Page. Yeah.
Yes, the same, just my name, Silé Edwards. LinkedIn is a really good tool to use. I can't remember who asked this, so I'm very sorry I haven't got your name up on my screen at the moment, but someone did ask what are the best ways to connect with people, which is why I brought this up. And Twitter's really good. LinkedIn also can't be underestimated, because a lot of people are their very professional selves on LinkedIn. So you might find more resources and more ways of connecting with people who are putting their business self forward. So if you want to know more about the kind of events you can get involved with, or any advice that people could be giving out, LinkedIn's also a good place for that. I've got a question up here from Marwa, who asks a very interesting question. I'd love to get your spin on, Stephen, which is publishing a fulfilling career? And why did you choose it? What is it about this particular career path that appealed to you?
For me, and I think for almost everyone I know who works in publishing, I think it's an incredibly fulfilling career. I think it has its frustrations. I sort of joke often with my team that one of the things that publishers are really good at, and agents also have to be good at, is coping with failure. Because we dream so big for so many things, and only so many things can be successful. Publishing, we publish a lot of books compared to the movie industry or even the music business. We put out a lot more new things than those industries do. So we are bound to have to cope with failure. But I think, so why did I choose it? I mean, I choose it because of reading. As I say, I grew up in the Midlands, and I grew up in a house that had quite a lot of music in it. And my mum was the reader in the house, and my older brother. But I wasn't. And it had its, like most childhoods, it had its complications. And I'm an identical twin for a start. My identical twin studied English literature, so I've obviously made his life misery by going to Faber Faber. So, I just found when I started to read as an adult that it just helped me to make sense of the world. I really was one of those people for whom reading became a form of nourishment and consolation and education and entertainment that I just, since I was 18, I've never not had a book in my pocket every hour of every day. It's just one of those things. But I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I am just a reader. I don't carry any torch or desire to be a critic, or I just love reading. I love books. I love what books do in the world. And I suppose the longer you're in the industry, the more it becomes fulfilling, because you begin to realize what a privilege it is to be able to read. So, literacy and those connected social issues that come alongside the industry become things that you become, if you want to, you become involved in, and you can campaign for. So I think 13 years ago, I became president of the Publishers Association, and I took public libraries as my kind of theme. So I've been very closely involved with the Public Library Service ever since. And through that, I've met so many extraordinary people, frontline librarians. And so there's that side of it where you can't escape the fact that reading and writing are cultural, and by which I don't mean sort of high culture. I mean our culture. Reading and writing is at the center of all culture. On the other end of it, of course, books come from all kinds of people. So I've met chefs, I've met literary novelists, I've been to the Nobel Prize, I've met children's writers who are hilarious, I've met comics, I've met, so there's a book in so many people that if you're in the industry, you get to work on such a range of things. And as a result, I guess at the dinner party, when people find out you work in the book world, you kind of know you've read so many proposals and read so many books and met so many people. You're the walking anecdote usually. It's something, and you don't really realize it until somebody says, "So what's your day like?" And then you say, "Well, I did this," and they go, "Did you?" And of course, the other thing I suppose that I should say is that I find the business side of it incredibly fulfilling and enjoyable. I came through selling and marketing, and I loved the products that I was selling and marketing, but I did just genuinely enjoy the process of making a business successful. So I think, there are so many different levels on which personally I found the industry fulfilling. And the one thing I would say is it's not been fulfilling just because I've ended up running something. I never set out to run something. Every job I've done in the industry I've found interesting and fulfilling and challenging, and good days and bad days, like any job, but in the end I feel immensely fortunate to have found this as the thing I do.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with that. I was very lucky that I found what I wanted to do, and which was publishing, quite early on, and then found agenting relatively early on into that journey as well. And that was through a lot of conversations with people, a little bit like this, asking what people want to do and listening to what they want to do with their role, even if they've been doing it for many years, and how they want to move the industry forward and what they can do from their role and their position, and then seeing where I kind of fit within that. I think it's...
And Silé, had you heard of agenting before you came into the industry? Did you think of literary agency as part of it?
No. So when I was 16, I just was, finishing my A-levels, and my grandmother said to me, "So what do you want to do, like, with your life?" And I was like, "I'm 16, I don't know." And she was like, "Well, whatever you do, you need to make sure that you enjoy it and that you're making money." And so I was like, okay, so I love books. I'm going to go and study English. What is it that I can do with that love and with that skill of being able to read something really fast, which doesn't feel like a skill at all. It still doesn't, even though it's a big part of my job. Being able to read something really fast and tell people about it. How can I form a career from that? So I asked around, I asked a lot of people what kind of areas I could get into, and marketing was one, and PR and communications, not in publishing, just generally, were another area that people told me to get into. And then I found publishing quite by accident, by speaking to Jo Unwin, who's a literary agent, who gave me a really good steer on what she does. And I did an internship with the company she was with at the time before she set up her own agency, and just loved it. I fell in love with the business end of publishing because I like making money and I like reading books, and so agenting is a perfect marriage of the two. And also, I'm not afraid to say that. I think a lot of people do shy away because there's a lot of opaqueness around the industry, especially around salaries and starting salaries and how much money you can realistically expect to make. And so when I was looking at what I want to do, I couldn't see an area of publishing that would necessarily pay me well enough to live the life I wanted to live. And so I made sure that when I was looking at my options, I picked the area that I enjoyed most, that also gave me enough money to, eat and feed my baby. I didn't have a baby at the time, but now feed my baby, because that is really important. So yeah, I found agenting quite by accident, but really love it and hope to be in 20 years time still an agent, still loving it.
And I suppose that you touch on something which is important to talk about, isn't it? Which is that the industry, had remained a very kind of middle class industry. With the industry I joined in the late 80s, salaries were not good. There was no transparency around salaries. And I think in the last few years, that has got a good deal better. so a publisher like Faber, we pay the London living wage for all starter salaries, and we advertise those now on our job adverts and all of that. And I think that there's a greater understanding of the need to progress through careers. But publishing, publishing is I wouldn't say it's not sort of built as a business like that. It's quite slow, some parts of it, particularly the editorial side, where progress can be slow because very few vacancies come up. Publishing is growing, the publishing industry is growing, but it doesn't mean that sort of there are easy pathways, particularly perhaps in the editorial side, that are opening up, because people have very long careers, and so it is tough in that way. But I think the industry's getting much clearer about the fact that there's such a variety of roles, and many people approach publishing thinking they want to work in the editorial side because they love reading and they love books. But I've never been very far away from reading and books in my whole career, and I've not worked in editorial. And there are all sorts of extraordinary roles now in publishing, from everything from data and information across to archiving through to audio. There's a fantastic post on LinkedIn if you get a chance, which is from Penguin Random House, and it's about the sort of variety of roles. And also the Publishers Association have done a good sort of profile, something on that as well. And it's well worth looking into the full range of jobs, and to not think, to actually not just think that publishing is about the sort of editorial side of it. There's a very fast moving, commercial, enjoyable side to the sort of main part of the business, which is about the commerce of it, which is still very vocational, still very close to the writing, and also the career paths are quicker, I would say.
I think there's a lot to do with the life cycle of a book as well, because when an agent, someone's asked this too, what's the kind of, how long does it take for a book to be published from manuscript right through to being on the shelves, hopefully in Waterstones. And when an agent sells a book to a publisher, and then the publisher then goes through the process of making it into a book, working with all of the various areas, that can take a year or 18 months to actually have a finished book. And so in that time, that's a year or 18 months of someone's life and career, but that's only one book that they've done in that time. You might be doing multiple at the same time, but that amount of time is quite long, or can feel quite long. And so it can be quite difficult to feel like you can break in, because if someone is waiting for the whole book to be finished so that they can then say, look, I've done this book, now I deserve a promotion, or now I deserve to move somewhere else and get paid a bit more, that can be quite difficult. And I think that's something that's not as transparent as it should be, that process of bringing out a book can be quite long, and where in some other industries you can prove your worth and move on quite easily and quite quickly, you have to sometimes wait for that book to firstly be made and then to be a success, and then you can point to it, and then you can move on either internally or go elsewhere. So I think that plays a big part in the length of time it takes people to move on.
There's another sort of slightly unsayable thing, which is that also publishing is not a very high margin business. There are tech businesses and things like that who have very high margins. Publishing's great, is a very cash heavy business. You have to put a lot of money in up front because of the time it takes sometimes, and therefore overheads are tight, and people work pretty hard, and therefore also that the sort of progress and has been in the past quite difficult, quite congested. I feel like this is shaking up a bit. I feel like this is moving, these processes are moving more quickly now. And one of the interesting things about the sort of last, I suppose, the 5-year period up to the pandemic actually is a period in which publishing came out of a sort of digital challenge. All of media was challenged by the digital revolution of the late 90s and early noughties. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and there was a lot of people being told by all sorts of people that we were over and we're finished and we're a legacy business and all that stuff. And we kind of knew that probably wasn't true, but we didn't know. Whereas in the last 5 or 10 years, it's become really clear that publishing has weathered that digital revolution and evolved. And therefore, there's a lot of confidence within the publishing industry at the moment about investing in new writers, in new copyright, and in their own businesses. And so I think it's a very good time. It's a very optimistic time to be looking at publishing and thinking about a career in it.
No, I agree. I'm conscious of time, and there's been a few questions on the Q&A, which are, one of them is a master's in publishing an important qualification to be considered? And I'm just going to roll that in to that question. Sorry, was from Samperna. I hope I've said your name right. I'm so sorry if I have not said your name right. Please correct me if it's wrong. But I'm going to roll that into another one, which is coming up quite a lot, is, as a graduate with an English degree or as a graduate with a film degree, how do I stand out? Is having a degree, firstly, necessary? And secondly, how do I use my degree to get a job? Because that's something, there's a big gap at the moment with people doing degrees and then not necessarily getting a job once they're out of it. And just my 2 pence on that is, you don't have to have a degree. It's not essential to have a degree of any kind to get into publishing. But if you do have one, if you have done it, that is not a bad thing. And I don't want anybody who's doing a degree or an MA, especially in publishing, to feel like they're wasting their time doing that, because you're learning so much and you'll be absorbing so much. And if you do have a degree, you can use all of those skills that you've learned of researching, writing essays quickly. If you were like me and didn't do the reading till the day before, then you can use all of those skills in your publishing job if you are able to secure one, or you can use it to secure one, because you can say, look at all these skills I've learned over the years doing my degree. But if you don't have one, there are other ways that you can get into publishing as well. Would you say that's kind of right, or am I just rambling?
No, I think, I mean, there's a statistic about the creative industries, which is that 71% of people in the creative industries have a degree, you know, compared to 44% in the rest of the economy. So the creative industries generally have been driven very much by people with degrees, but a lot of those degrees are from arts, humanities, and sort of vocational creative, such as a film degree. And so there's a sort of, I think it's slightly the reverse, that yes, a lot of people turn up with a degree, therefore it doesn't necessarily distinguish you from other candidates. And I think some of the things we were saying earlier about thinking hard about the industry and how you apply, and not limiting yourself, if you have an English degree, for instance, not limiting yourself to thinking that that leads to an editorial role. The MA, for quite a while, I would say that the MA was one of the really distinguishing assets that an applicant could have, till about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say. It remains a good thing to do. There's no doubt. You arrive very job ready. You know, I think that's the thing that we would say about people who've studied MAs in publishing, is that they tend to turn up knowing a lot about the industry. They tend to turn up, they've done an internship, you know, they hit the ground really running. So that remains appealing. But I think in some ways it was reinforcing a certain feeling within the industry that it's a too narrow a pipeline, that the ability to be able to afford an MA, or the ability to even have a degree and do an MA, might be excluding some people from the industry that we don't any longer want to feel that we're excluding. So I think it's a lot of it is just that there are of course other things, like, you know, industry internships. So the Publishers Association website has a very good and comprehensive list of all the places you can do graduate placements, internships. I hope we've banished unpaid internships from the industry. I think we have, but there might be the odd rogue out there. But you know, I think it's really, really important to say that you know, internships should be paid, and you shouldn't accept anything less. The industry is very interested in finding recruits and very interested in internships, and there's a lot of demand for them. So I suppose, you know, in that, if you like, in that sort of hierarchy, an MA is definitely a good thing to do if you have the time and you can. It's definitely rounds out your, and it shows that you're really serious about joining the industry. But I think it's still on its own is not enough. I think you have to demonstrate that real interest in the industries. For instance, one of the things we say to MA interns at Faber is, think really hard about your dissertation, and think about it being something that answers questions that the industry wants answers to. Because then you put that on your CV, that's a powerful statement about you being interested in being one of the people who's going to mold this industry into a successful, continuingly successful industry. So there's that, you know, I think there is, but I do want to stress that there, exactly as Silé said, that you don't have to have a degree, and it's increasingly the case that the industry is trying to get its mind around understanding different pathways. Apprenticeships, for instance, so there's a publishing apprenticeship has just begun. There's a cohort of 20 odd people on it, and that those 20 people will be essentially employed now by publishing businesses. And I think there's an appetite from the government to make apprenticeships more approachable for industries like publishing, and actually the creative industries, where we have a lot more sort of freelance. And so and we don't really think about apprenticeships in our sector, but I think it'll increasingly be one of the ways to make your start, would be to get onto an apprenticeship program. So I think that the channels are opening wider. I think having a degree, behind the question is a certain, how do I make an English degree interesting? And I think you're right that having a degree is not in itself going to get you to the front of any queue. You have to fight much harder than that in terms of your industry interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to stress really hard: do not work for free. I say this as an agent and as someone who has worked for free before and worked another job to compensate working for free. So I'm working at the same time. It's horrible, and it's not necessary either. So if you are thinking about getting into publishing and someone wants to offer you an internship or work experience, they need to be paying you for that time. So just make sure that that's always happening. Kevin's asked about publishing opportunities and people who are offering internships at the moment and them being heavily based in London. And with the pandemic, a lot of people are working from home or working remotely. I mean, we're both at home at the moment, but still doing this. And there are so many of you from all over the country joining us today. And I think that's a big step for the industry. I think traditionally it's been quite London based for many, many reasons, but that's not an excuse and that's not right. I think that people are making massive strides to try and diversify the geographical location of their staff. We've taken on a remote intern as well at Mushens, and we are trying to make sure that whenever we're looking for people to join us or to do any sort of experience or internships with us, that they have as easy access to being able to do that as possible without having to relocate. And there are loads of schemes as well. I know the Spare Room project is one that help people get opportunities if it's based in London and you can't necessarily relocate for a few months or a few weeks. But are you seeing, Stephen, more people either within your own business or just generally in publishing being more open to remote working and taking on people at entry level and at intern? Because I know that it's quite difficult when you're at that lower level to kind of say, right, I'm working from home, okay, see you later, senior manager. Are you seeing more flexibility for people?
Yes, I think there are many things that were beginning to evolve in the industry that were greatly accelerated by the pandemic. And I'm a bit wary of the, hey, look at all the good things that have happened in the pandemic, because that's not a narrative I particularly like. But there's unquestionably the certain things have accelerated, and one of those is the notion of remote working, and stopping calling it remote working for a start and calling it just distributed workforces or whatever. The jargon will keep changing, but and I think it's combined with this conversation about much greater sense that we need the publishing industry to function across the United Kingdom, and that is in line with also the creative industries generally are looking to create sort of new clusters across the United Kingdom. So and of course, there's quite a lot of government money coming into that. The Levelling Up agenda is one that has a strong regional heart to it. So there's two things here. One is to say, I think publishers will be far more open to remote working and flexibility. It'll probably, there are aspects to, there are roles where it's easier to do than others. Some of the creative teamwork is much harder in the distributed environment than some of the more discrete jobs where you just power through the work and get things done. So some degree of blend is where we'll end up, and we were not in a blend particularly beforehand. And then in parallel to that, the moves made by HarperCollins, by Hachette, and no doubt they'll be followed quite soon by most publishing houses will be looking to establish other parts of their business around the United Kingdom, and therefore remote, if you like, or distributed working that can then check in at a local, can have space at a sort of local office, or spend a bit of time there and come to the, wherever the main office is from time to time. I think that model will evolve very rapidly, because I think people will quite quickly see the benefits of not being so London and Southeast centric. It will benefit quickly. And I'm a boy from the Midlands, and most of the people I know from the Midlands in publishing, sort of, I found it out about them. There's some invisible silence about it, that we didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, and we didn't grow up in the southeast of England, so we just didn't talk about it. And then you suddenly say, you've got a slight, I mean, I haven't got a Brummie accent, you'll hear. Apparently only when I get really angry does it come out, but which is obviously not very often. But but I do think that there's the regionality has to come, and it's in these two ways.
Diana has asked, is it possible to make it in the publishing industry with an accent? So I thought that was quite a good question to ask you. And do you have any tips for people that are bilingual but speak fluent English? I would always say that's a skill, and that's a really great skill to have. I mean, anyone who's bilingual is awesome. I think if you can speak more than one language, then there's nothing but advantages to that. So that I think that's a great thing.
Exactly, and accents. If there's a barrier to accents in publishing in Britain, I will be well. If I don't know. I'm trying to use language that's allowed. It makes me furious if there's any notion. I know that in some ways culturally, publishing has all sorts of invisible impediments for all sorts of underrepresented. That I think it's now understand. If you are a middle class and white industry, which publishing has been too much so for a very long time, of course you create cultures where it's invisible to you when you erect barriers to others. And I think that conversation is now one that is being had full-bloodedly in publishing, and leaders such as myself should rightly be held to account if we don't create an industry that is open to all, and that those barriers fall. It's just not acceptable.
Yeah. So to Diana, who asked that question, and anyone else who's worried about that, anything that makes you different, whether it's an accent or whether it's the color of your skin, where you come from, that shouldn't be a barrier to publishing. And because it has historically, that doesn't mean that it should be or will continue to be. And a lot of people are becoming more aware of that. And I think that anybody making you feel like that should be A, in the minority, and B, are completely wrong and shouldn't be working in any industry, but especially not publishing. So I don't want anyone to leave this feeling like they can't enter the industry because there's something that makes them different to the typical publishing employee.
No, and I suppose there's, all the major publishing houses now have policies and practices that will eradicate any of this, discrimination, which is completely unacceptable. It's actually, frankly, illegal. And it's there. I think as an industry, I think probably to join the industry now, it will feel like an industry that's learning a new way of being. But I think that new way of being will be fairly rapid. I look at I listen to lots of conversations at very senior levels within the industry, and they are not they're not conversations where I come away thinking, oh, here we go again, you're just saying stuff. I really do come away thinking there is a concerted and sort of urgent and to some degree alarmed feeling, that we really cannot leave this industry in the state that we found it as a group of leaders who are in charge of the industry. We have to change, and so some degree of that will be in progress. But I would be extremely disappointed if over the coming years that sort of cultural barriers for people were felt to remain, or if they were found that they couldn't be called out and openly challenged and changed, and have the support of senior leadership in the industry to understand and to change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is such a huge conversation that if we were to have it in 10 minutes, we wouldn't do it justice at all. But I've just spotted a question from Farida, who's asked if we would share one book that had the biggest impact on our lives. And life is a very big question. I think there are loads of books that have had an impact on my life that are, yeah, but my career, I can answer. And especially in terms of this conversation, I'd say it's two books, both published by Walker Books. One was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which a lot of people will hopefully know because it's great and it's done really well. That book, I feel, was a real shift. I felt a shift in publishing at that point. I was an intern, and it felt like that was the book that for a lot of people kind of made them go, oh, if we publish books like this, we can attract such an array of people, both in the industry and outside of it. And we can cater to so many voices that we weren't catering to before. And that shift has continued and people building on it. And I was at Walker just after they published it, and it was doing really well. And then the second book that impacted my career was Nothing But the Truth, which is a book of theirs which wasn't as big as The Hate You Give, but it had a Black protagonist as well. And I worked on it, and using that book to make my applications from that internship onwards stand out is why I've had the career trajectory I've had. I got so involved in doing that. I was an intern in editorial, but I asked to sit in on the marketing meetings. I asked to sit in on the cover design briefs. I asked to get involved in the sales meetings and to see their strategy for it. So I really got an understanding of how a book is made in all the different areas of publishing. And that's why I'd always pick that book as the biggest impact on my career, because putting myself forward just that little bit extra in the internship to be able to see all the different areas that the book went through, so that when I came out of that internship, I could use it for my other applications to stand out and to say I have this experience. Okay, I was an editorial intern, but I sat in on marketing, sales, rights, design, and to know all of those areas was really helpful. So that would be another bit of advice. If you're in an internship, make the most out of it. Use everything, use everyone, get as much information and knowledge as you can, because you're only there for a brief amount of time, so get as much out of it as possible. Talked a lot. So what book is it for you, Stephen, that kind of, I think for your career might be a better thing to surmise in the next 8 minutes?
Yes. So there's I suppose the interesting thing about a publishing career is that, a bit like that story about taking away the jobs and showing the skills, the other thing I could do is take away the skills and just show the books. The books I've worked on that were successful, the books that I learned from. And I mean, before all that, the sort of pre-answer is the book that I read that made me a reader, which was Madame Bovary by Flaubert, which is a book about provincial boredom in many ways. And I led a boring provincial childhood. And somewhere in that book, when I read it, it was given to me by a friend who just, I thought you might like this. And I was like, I don't really read French novels, and I read it and I found all of life in this book. So that's a book that made me, that's the book that kind of turned me as a reader. But probably the book in my career that I would point to is The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. So when I was selling gardening books and other things, and I got my break of getting a job as a sales director at Fourth Estate. And it was a company of about 10 people above a bike shop in Ladbroke Grove, totally kind of, it was basically people in their late 20s. And then the boss, Vicky Barnsley, who was 40 maybe, and Vicky was a sort of serial entrepreneur and a very, ended up running HarperCollins. And when I arrived, just as I arrived, she sent me some books, and one of the books was The Shipping News in hardback. And I read this novel. This is 1994, okay. And we were paperbacking this book in the summer, in August, I remember. And I arrived as sales director in January, and this company was all over the place. I mean, they were they were not in any way organized. I remember asking, could I see the schedule of books? And they sort of looked at me and went, well, which month did you want to know about? I was like, well, I want to know about every month, and I want to know what my budgets are. And they were like, you could set some budgets if you like. You know, it was not in a great shape. But of course, from this kind of really quite anarchistic company, they were making great success because they broke every rule. And so the rule that we broke was we wouldn't sell our paperback rights, and we'll hold on to them. And I arrived, having read the Shipping News, so kind of nourished by the idea I was about to work on fiction. And I read this book, and if you haven't read the Shipping News, please read it. It's the most wonderful, quirky, odd book that is just brilliant from beginning to end. And I just decided that everything I'd learned at Transworld, I was going to impose at Fourth Estate. I was going to take the big company machine, put it into a tiny company, and by August, when we published the Shipping News, we're going to make it a bestseller. And we sold 500,000 copies of the Shipping News in paperback, having sold 2,500 hardbacks. And I learned the following things. I learned, one, that what you do really matters. You know, publishing is an activity. It is a thing where you make public. And Shipping News was possibly the first, but is not by any means the last book where I've gone home at night thinking, I did good work today. I made a great book pass into the hands of other readers. And you know, you have never found your last reader is the second lesson. If someone had said to me, how many people would be interested in the Shipping News? I'll always give the same answer, which is, I don't know, but I'll find you the first 20,000. And once we found those 25,000, let's find another 20, and then let's find 100, and then let's find the next 100. And it's that sort of ability to put more and more air in the balloon as you teach people that one of the joys of publishing is that you find out how little you know very often, because what you don't know is just how various and intrigued and interested people are. And if you can draw them towards the flame that you have lit, you can do extraordinary things with a book. And so the Shipping News was the book. And the other things I learned were selling sort of paperbacks. You have to get into the business of trust with your partners who are the booksellers. And you can't promise the earth and then not deliver it more than once. And so with the Shipping News, of course, what I won was a lot of trust from the booksellers to know something about what might work. And I learned that I possibly did, you know. And so that sort of Fourth Estate's reputation. But I guess the last thing to say that I learned from that book, and why it's the sort of career book, is that it all came from reading it. You know, all of my confidence and belief, all my ability to sell it to other people and talk about it came from the fact that book moved me and made me laugh, and was unlike any other book I'd ever read. So I could talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's the key about working in publishing, is being able to talk about books in whatever area you're in, being able to read something and love it, but then turn that love and that passion into a pitch, or being able to convince someone else to read it. And what a lot of people have asked today, how to make themselves stand out, or how to be, you know, set yourself out of the crowd. And I think the last bit of advice I want to give before we wrap up today is that you should be able to talk about books confidently and proudly in whatever area you're going into. That's editorial, marketing, sales, rights, agenting. It doesn't matter. Practice on your friends and family. Pick a book you really love and try and convince them to read it too. And I think Josie's come back, so I think that means that we are at the end.
That was a perfectly sage, brilliant piece of advice, Silé, to finish off. Stephen, have you got a sentence of final advice for everyone?
Yes, never in my career have I felt so excited and optimistic about the industry I work in. And part of that is to do with the generation joining it, who are going to reimagine it. And I think, you know, I would really encourage you to think that there is an exciting industry in front. It's going to be a different industry. It will change in some ways, but at its heart, the thing that won't change is the thing we've been talking about quite a bit, both of us, you know, about that business that we do talk about books, we do read. It is vocational in some way, but it's highly professional and highly commercial. And it harnesses technology while not being just about technology. So that's what I'd say. And you know, we need you is the other thing. You know, we need people to solve our questions, and we need a generation who feel about publishing like my generation did, but do it anew, make it new, as Ezra Pound said.
I know that we could keep on going for hours. We've got like so many questions flooding in, and poor Silé's done an unbelievable job of fielding these, but we haven't even touched the side. So we'll have to repeat this again, guys. But listen,
yeah, anytime.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll be taking you up on that. But it's really genuinely fascinating listening to you, the state of the industry, advice. You are full of jam-packed full of wise words and totally inspirational, both of you. So we're really, really grateful for it, and for you joining us. And for everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed today, and thank you for participating on the chat. It's been lovely to hear about your favourite books and where you've all come from. And please do stay in touch. We've got so many roles on our site at the moment. We're doing CV clinics, we're doing special ones just around publishing, which the brilliant Vanessa's running on our team about tailoring your CV for publishing industry. We've got mentoring programs, all sorts of things. So good luck to all of you out there. And it's not easy at the moment, but we're all here for you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next masterclass soon. So thank you again to Silé and Stephen, and see you all soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.